Okay, we've still got a couple of minutes before our official start time, so what we're going to do the last couple of minutes before 8 o'clock, any questions that you guys have lingering from last week in terms of calculator stuff?
When I mentioned you said you were
Okay, what specifically?
okay, I'll do it. Doing it yesterday. A12. What's number 83? Which I put like the previous balance at the 15,000 because I thought apartment houses present a net income of 15,000 per year, so that would be.
Okay, so which one? A12? Is that what you said?
A12, yes.
Okay. All right. So with A12, in this case, this is annual compounding, so one payment per year. Okay. And in this case, it's the term is going to be 3 years. 3 shift in. Okay. You're going to be able to sell the land 3 years from now at $25,000 an acre. So that is going to be your future value. And it's asking how much should you pay for the land now if you require a rate of return of 25%. So 25% is your interest rate. And so in this case, all you're doing is you are solving for present value. Okay, and that's going to give you your price per acre. Okay, so let's do that real quick. So you should be able to pay $12,800 per acre. Okay. What was the other one?
A3.
A3? Okay. All right. With A3, this is annual as well. So 1 payment per year. And in this case, the income is going to be $15,000 per year, so that's going to be a payment. And then we're looking for the net selling price after 5 years, so the term is 5 years. And the price is going to be $150,000, so that's going to be income to us of our future value. And our required rate of return is 14%. So we're simply going to be solving for, once again, present value. All right. And so that means we can pay $129,401.51.
Is there an easier way to figure out the difference between like the problem that you have to find it, to know if you're pressing the payment button or the PV button?
Okay. The payment is something that occurs more than once. Okay, so it's a payment that you're either receiving as a potential lease payment or it's a mortgage payment. So it's something that's happening more than once. Okay, and it's called an annuity, but it's a payment.
Okay.
So I mean, think of it. I mean, normally you make more than one payment for something that you are purchasing or that you're leasing. Whereas present value is a fixed number, fixed payment, one time only. Same thing with future value.
When we get payments in different amounts, like for example in Ford.
Yeah. Okay, now whenever you have payments that are in different amounts, then those are going to be considered to be cash flows. Okay, so that is then whenever you have to use the cash flow function on the calculator. So the payment is a fixed amount for a set number of times. Okay, whereas the cash flows are, in essence, payments, but they are different dollar amounts each period. Or can be the same dollar amount for a certain number of periods and then change to a different dollar amount, but they are going to potentially change.
You do 15, since that one
Okay.
is like that, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Did you say 815? Mike?
Okay, so A15, it's asking you the present worth of an income-producing property which receives after-tax cash flows of the dollar amounts of 20,000 in year 1, 22,000 in year 2, 25 in year 3, 30 in year 4, and 32,000 in year 5, and then assume a discount rate of 15%. So in essence, this is a net present value problem, okay? So first things first, one payment per year. All right. And if you, once again, if you want to go ahead and put that step in, just make sure everything is kosher, clear all. All right. Now, so for your initial cash flow for time period 0, it's going to be 0 because once again, as I stated last week, the initial cash flow from your calculator's perspective, it always starts with time period 0. So if you're not given a cash flow for time period 0, you need to put in a 0 for that initial cash flow, okay?
Where is
Then
it? Where is CFJ?
CFJ,
Oh, I see it.
yep, middle of the third row, third column on the calculator. Okay? So now, just let me put in 20,000, cash flow sub J, 22,000, cash flow sub J, 25,000, cash flow sub J, 30,000, cash flow sub J, and 32,000, cash flow sub J. And then our discount rate of 15% is our interest rate. And then simply, we are solving for the net present value. Okay, let's do that real quick.
Is it important to put these cash flows in order? Is it
Yes, in this particular instance, you've got to put the cash flows in order because the timing matters. Okay?
That's the hard part about this class, kind of determining all these little things.
Well, that's why you have to practice it.
Some of the stuff, you know, like, you know. I don't know, but on the next one.
Okay?
School for 20 years.
83,526.62. Okay, would be your net present value. And once again, the meaning of that would just simply be that at time period 0, that would be the most that you would be willing to pay for that series of cash flows with that discount rate of 15%.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
814?
Okay.
Hang on, while you're still there. Can you refresh my memory how to do, if the cash flows are all the same, you do CFJ, enter the number, and then you
Yep.
enter the number,
So-
and C,
If the cash flows had been the same, which they're not, but if they would have been, like for example, if 20,000 had been the same for, let's say, 4 years, you would simply do 20,000 and then do 4, shift, N sub J.
and J, right? It's okay.
Okay? All right. Okay, moving on.
814.
A14. A14. Okay, so this is monthly, it's 12 payments per year. And then also, they state what? It's an annuity due. Okay, remember we talked about that. That means the payment is received or made at the beginning of the period. So in that particular case, we need to go ahead and take the calculator, shift it over into begin mode. All right, and in this case, we're going to be paying $1,000 a month. So $1,000 is going to be a cash outflow to us, and that's going to be a payment since it is occurring multiple times. And that's going to be 5 years, or a total of 60 payments. 5 times 12 will be 60. And simultaneously, we can sublease the property for $1,800 a month, annuity due for 5 years. What's the value of your leasehold interest at 12%? So let's first of all just go ahead and find the value of this piece. Okay. Oops. 12 is your interest rate, and then solve for present value. So start with that part. So 1,000, change the sign, payment, shift in, interest rate, solve for present value. Okay, so that piece, 45,404.59. Okay, now, the alternative to this is instead of you actually using the space, you are subleasing the space to someone else, and in that case, we'll sort of start over here, treat it as a separate problem. Now we're going to go ahead and leave the begin-end mode in place, so we don't need to repeat it again because then that would change it to end mode. But we're going to go ahead and leave that in place. And then in this case, it's going to be $1,800 as our payment for 5 years at the 12% discount rate, and then find the present value of that. Okay. Okay, I get 81,000. 728.26. Okay, so let's make sure that we're clear about what we're about to do. So this is us. We have this lease that we would be making $1,000 payments to the landlord, and in essence, the value of this lease today, from our perspective, would be $45,404. Okay. Now, we have the opportunity to sublease the property to another tenant, okay, to somebody else, and we can sublease it to them. In other words, they're going to pay us $800 a month more than what the actual cost of our lease is. So we're, in essence, really getting to pocket $800 a month as the primary tenant. Does that make sense? So all we're doing, we're finding the total value of that lease, and then we're just simply going to subtract one from the other. Okay, now you could just put in the 800 by itself and solve, you're going to get the same answer. Yeah, for present value. In other words, you could do, well, let's just go ahead and 81, 728.26 minus 45, 404.59, and what do we get for that?
36,323.
Okay. All right. So this is the answer. Okay. Now let's just try to see if we can prove it over here. Again, we don't need to change the beginning end, we're just gonna keep it as is. All right, but we're just gonna put in 800 as our payment. 5 years. Keep doing that. 12% interest rate, solve for present value. Let's see what happens. Voila. 36, 323, 67.
Well, where did that 800 came from?
The difference.
The difference
Oh, okay.
between 800 and 1,000 is 800.
Got it.
Okay? Yep.
On the first one, I understand where you put 1,000 plus minus because the money is going out, you're paying, right? But on the second part, you're receiving 1,800, right?
And you could flip that if you choose to.
Good. Okay.
That's what I need.
Now, you could flip, and in this particular instance, you could flip it.
I can just put 1,800 PMT.
You could.
Okay.
I mean, you can do it on the first one as well. The only time it matters in terms of the pluses and the minuses is, at the end of the day, what matters is if you've got a present value and a payment, or a future value and a payment, then, or a present value and a future value, something has to be negative.
Okay.
Something has to be negative, because there has to be one party that is giving away something and one party that is receiving something, okay? Because if they're both positives, the calculator, and from an accounting perspective, that's like money falling from the sky, because it's not, you're not able to calculate a return because you haven't invested anything,
Get that no solution.
and you get no solution, okay?
So usually when you have a problem that has present value or future value, one of them has to be negative.
Right. And then the issue is that if you put this in as negative, this is going to be positive. If you put this in as positive, this is going to be negative. The calculator, that's what it's going to return as your answer.
And then when you subtract it from the other one, you get the right answer.
Right.
Okay.
It's very straightforward. Okay? Just all you do is think about the logic of, once again, inflows and outflows. Everything ultimately is set up as either an inflow or as an outflow. Okay? What's that?
In the beginning of the class, you explained the difference between term and amortization.
Yep.
Can you go over that again? Because it
Okay.
sounds like I'm looking at the same thing, but it's not.
It's not the same.
Okay. The concept of term versus amortization, and these get used sloppily, interchangeably. Okay, let me just sort of start off with that. Okay, technically, this is why now once again I'm trying to be very precise when I say this. Technically, the term is simply the duration of the loan with the lender. Okay, the duration of the relationship between the borrower and the lender. So, as an example, I get a loan from you, and you tell me that we're going to have a 5-year contract for this loan. Okay, that is in essence the term. Okay, the amortization period is simply how we go about calculating the payments and what duration we use for calculating the payments of the loan. So, as I said, the normal situation for commercial loans is to have a 5-year term with potentially a 15, 20, 25, or 30-year amortization. Okay? And all that means is that the payments of the loan are going to be based on 15, 20, 25, 30, but you're going to have an outstanding balance that is going to be due and payable at the end of 5 years.
And then you have to
Okay?
refinance.
So you either have to refinance, at the end of 5 years, either you have to refinance the loan with that lender or a new lender, or you have to sell the property,
Right.
or you have to come out of your back pocket with the cash to pay off the balance.
Okay.
or you end up in default.
Because in
And,
my mind,
and that's actually a very good point. Let me hit on this just for a second. So let's just say you go in and you get a loan, just like I described. You get a loan with a 20 or 30-year amortization, but it's a 5-year term, okay? And at the end of that 5 years, as I just said, your options are refinance the loan, either with that lender or another lender, pay off the loan, either with your own funds or other funds that you've gotten from somewhere else, or selling the property, okay, or potentially default. Now this last one, the default. What happens whenever you go in, let's say at the peak of the market, and you get a loan? All right? 5 years later, the market has substantially declined with respect to the value of that property and other properties. Okay? That is probably one of the worst situations that you, as a potential borrower, can get yourself into, because here's what's going to happen. Even though you theoretically could continue making the mortgage payments, okay, if everything had just kept going, the lender is now saying, all right, you've got to either refinance this loan, you've got to sell the property, you know, you've got to pay off the property, whatever, or once again, default. Well, what if you can't sell the property? What if you can't get the money out of your back pocket to pay back the loan? And what if the lender is not willing or able to refinance the property, and not able to even do so at the level that they previously had financed the property? Like, for example, if the property originally were valued, let's say, at $1 million, but then 5 years later, let's say the value has dropped to where it's now $750,000, the lender is not going, I mean, in other words, your original loan might have been an 80% or $800,000 loan, but the value now of the property is potentially more than what they originally lent you. And they're going to say, we need all that potentially, or a good portion of that paid back, and we're only going to lend you 80% of $750,000, or refinance 80% of $750,000, which would be $600,000. So there's a good chance that you may be in a situation, if hypothetically, if you've not really paid off much of the balance, you could very well stand to have to put in close to $200,000 of new equity into the deal in order for them to refinance. Well, what if you don't have that extra $200,000 in equity? In essence, you're going to end up defaulting, meaning you potentially are going to lose the property. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that scenario happens a lot more often than you think.
Sure.
Because, as we all know, markets fluctuate. They go up, they go down. They go up, they go down. They go up, they go down. And right now, I don't think there's very many people that would argue with me, we're at the peak of the market. There's a good chance that within the next 2 to 3, 4 years, we're going to see a substantial decline. Okay, for a variety of reasons. Interest rates may go up. We may have all kinds of other issues and changes with the economy. We've got overbuilding that's taking place. There's a whole number of things that are sort of there to create that quote-unquote perfect storm of, the market changing.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, those loans that are potentially being made today, they're going to come due 5 years from now, are going to be problematic. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So that is part of the reason why that you, as a developer, investor, would prefer not to have a 5-year term if you can avoid it. I mean, if you can find a lender that's willing to lend you for the entire, let's say, 15 years, or 20 years, or whatever it might be on that commercial loan, then that's probably not a bad thing to pursue. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, now another piece of this, which actually, you know, sort of follows on with this, where we're talking about some of the things that lenders do, and we're going to get into this a little bit later in even more detail, but a lender can also put provisions on commercial loans more so than they can on residential loans. And one of those provisions, we're going to talk about three major provisions. We're going to talk about loan origination fees at the beginning of the loan. We're going to talk about administrative fees over the course of the loan, and we're going to talk about prepayment penalties at the end of the loan. Okay? Well, this whole thing with, just talk about prepayment penalties for a second. The lender may say to you, all right, our particular loans, the way that we make them is, you know, we're going to give you a 15-year term on this loan and a 15-year amortization on the loan, but we're going to require you to hold that loan for the entire 15 years. If at any point during that 15 years you choose to prepay, we're going to charge you a penalty for doing so. And that penalty is going to be based upon the outstanding mortgage balance of the loan. So if you still owe, let's say, $600,000 on the loan, then you're going to pay, let's say, 5% of that as a prepayment penalty if you want to sell. But even beyond that, lenders go so far as to in some cases, make this even more restrictive and more onerous and say, we're not just going to charge you a prepayment penalty, we're going to charge you something called yield maintenance, or we're going to charge you all these other sort of fees to close out the loan early. And we're going to make it so ridiculously impossible to pay off that loan early and so expensive to pay it off early that if you do pay it off early, there's a good chance not only are you not going to make any money off of it, you're going to lose money and lose big. But part of the reason you're saying, well, why does a lender do that? And does every lender do that? No. Number one, every lender does not do that. The lenders that do that, the way in which they are able to, let's say, get away with it, think about it. They'll offer you a lower interest rate. Because, once again, as we talked about last week, the number one thing that borrowers are instantly attracted to, like a moth to the flame, is who has the lowest interest rate. But that lowest interest rate is not necessarily the best deal because there are usually strings attached to it. Okay? And that's part of, obviously, what we're going to be exploring, you know, in this course and obviously the other course. Okay? Does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
And today?
Okay? Other questions? Okay? So at this point, we're going to, once again, revert back to whatever questions that you've got with regard to computations using the calculator. And we'll move forward from there. Any of the other problems you want me to work through? Or rework?
Yeah, can you do again 34?
Okay.
Yeah.
This is, like I said, one of the retirement questions. And I believe this one is sort of a two-parter. And this is all annual, according to what I see here. So let's do this. Let's draw the timeline to make sure that we know what we're doing. All right, you plan to retire at the end of 10 years. Okay? All right, so retirement is going to occur here. All right? And in that fund, you at that particular point in time, you want to be able to draw out 9 annual payments, or you want to receive 9 annual payments of $100,000 beginning at the end of the first year. So in essence, here, we want to be able to draw out $100,000 in essence, starting in year 11, or the end of year 10, really. Okay. So we've got all that. All right. And you can make 9% interest over the entire period. and what is the amount of the 10 equal annual payments that you must put into the fund, and the last being on the day of your retirement if you want to accomplish that. So we need, what we're solving for is how much do we need to put in each of these years over this 10-year period. Okay? Does that make sense what we're solving for? Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is basically break apart the problem on this half. So that's where we have the numbers that are given to us. All right? So we want to, one payment per year. We know it's at 9%. We know that there are a total of 9 payments that it tells us that we're going to be drawing out. And we know that the dollar amount is $100,000. Okay, is everybody cool with that? So what we're going to be solving for
Present value.
is the present value, which is the value right here. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so let's do that. Make sure you got your calculator set back to in mode. Okay, so I get 599,524.69. Okay? All right, so that is the balance that we have to have in the account here, okay, in order to fund our retirement. So what we've got to figure out now is how do we go about accumulating that amount. So over on this side, once again, one payment per year, 9%. Now the difference is we're going to be putting in how many total payments? 10. And we're going to be using the 599, 524, 69 as our future value. And we are going to be solving for payment. Okay, and we get 39,460.77. Okay? That answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. Next question. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. If you take a look at your syllabus, okay, and this is what happens each week. We obviously have a quiz after we've covered the material. Well, we've already covered all the material that's on quiz 1, but what we're going to do is, just to make sure that you are in sync with what we're doing, is I'm going to work through an example problem, basically for each of these types of problems that are on your syllabus. So for example, if you look in your syllabus for quiz 1, question 1 is about compound interest. Did everybody see that? Okay, so let's work the problem on compound interest. Now the problems that we work are not necessarily going to be identical to the problem that you're going to see on the quiz. It's going to be very similar, but it's not going to be identical. You're still going to have to obviously, use your brain a little bit. Okay, so let's just sort of take, in this case, one of the things that we talked about last week was the use of compounding interest, and specifically, we said with real estate, you typically are either going to have annual compounding or you're going to have monthly. Okay? So, given that, let's just say we have a situation of where we are given a normal annual interest rate of a certain percent, and we want to convert it to a monthly interest rate. Okay? So let's do that. All right? Give me an interest rate. 6%. All right, so first of all, we're going to set the calculator up to 12 payments per year, since we're going to make this from an annual to a monthly. So we're going, just to make sure we're clear, annual to monthly. All right? So 12 payments per year, and you said 6%? Okay? So all you're going to have to do is you're going to put in 6, and then you can put in shift nom %, which is actually right underneath the interest rate key. Then simply solve for shift effective %, and that's going to give you the monthly equivalent, okay, in terms of the monthly effective, sorry, the annual effective interest rate if compounded monthly. Okay? So doing that, you should get 6.16778%. Okay? And so all that's telling us is that if our interest is compounded annually, our interest rate is just 6%. But if our interest is compounded monthly, the equivalent interest rate for 6% compounded monthly is going to be the 6.1677%. Does that make sense? Okay? So all that's doing is just simply showing you the effect of the additional compounding, in this case, on a monthly basis. All right. Moving forward. Okay. The second kind of problem is compound or future value. So that means that we're going to be basically solving for future value. All right? So, in this case, you tell me, what do you want it to be? Monthly or annual? Annual. Okay? What do we want the interest rate to be?
10%.
10%. Okay? Now, we could approach this a couple of different ways. We could have just a present value, we could have just a payment, or we could have a present value and a payment before we solve for future value. I mean, ultimately, we know our last step, because of telling you what kind of problem it is, we're solving for future value. The last step is solving for future value. So the question is, do we want, once again, both present value and payment, or one or the other?
If you don't have a present value, you should always enter 0, right? As a
No, it'll automatically assume it's 0.
automatic assumption.
Yep. Okay, so let me sort of draw this out real quick so we're clear. Okay, first of all, we know our interest rate is 10%. Okay, so that's the only thing we know with this problem so far, is our interest rate is 10%. All right, and we know that we're going to be solving for future value. Okay, so what other variables do we need to know? We need to know the term.
Number of years.
Okay, so how many years?
5 years.
How much?
5.
I'm hearing 10 and I'm hearing 5. We'll go with 7. Okay, so 7 years. All right, now the question is, at this point, over those 7 years, okay, what do we want to have happen? Do we want, once again, a single payment here that we want to figure out the future value, or do we want multiple payments each year to solve for future value, or do we want both? Let's do both. What the heck? Okay? So, our present value, how much are we going to invest in this? Whatever it is. $10,000. Okay? That's money, cash out of pocket. That's going to be a negative. So $10,000 negative. Whoops, not 100,000, 10,000. So, okay, so that's present value. Okay, now, how much of a payment are we either going to make? See, this is where the plus and minus begins to make a difference. Okay, we have spent $10,000. Yes, that's out of pocket. Now, here's the interesting part. We can look at this one of a couple of different ways. If we spent $10,000, we can make the assumption that this is an investment that we're making and that we're going to be receiving maybe payments over that 7-year period to us. And then at the end, we're going to sell it for whatever we sell it for. Yes?
But are we making a payment right now currently as well?
We're making the down payment or the present value right now. So that's out of pocket to us.
Right.
Okay? But here's my point. The payment that we have yet to set, it could be a positive or a negative depending on the circumstances. And I'm trying to make sure that you understand. Under this case, I have written a check for $10,000. I have given it to you. Okay. Now, the question then becomes, if Paul is my tenant, Paul may be paying me rent for the next 7 years. Yes? So if that's the case, then the rent that Paul is paying me is going to be a positive. Yes? Okay? Everybody follow that?
For him, it's a negative.
For him it's negative, but for me, this is what I'm concerned with, is me. Okay? So for me, that's going to be income. Okay? Now, let's switch back to this other situation. Once again, I have given you $10,000 to buy the property. But you have said, $10,000 is not enough to buy the property. That is simply a down payment. I am going to require from you additional annual payments of whatever dollar amount to fulfill the obligation of the purchase. Does that make sense? So in other words, if I were to pay you $1,000 a year, then in essence, I'm paying you $17,000. Does that make sense?
Yes. Why do you have a negative though?
Because I'm paying the money to you. Okay? All of the money is going to you.
It's from his
Whereas the other scenario, where it would be a positive, is if I'm receiving rent from Paul and then not making any payments to you. Does that make sense? So it's two different ways that you can sort of look at that. All right, so which way do we want it to be? You want me to collect rent from Paul, or do you want me to make extra payments to payment? Which way do you want me to do it?
Extra payment.
Okay, so extra payments to payment, so that simply means, all right, that's going to be a negative. All right? All right, so 10%. 10,000 has a negative present value, 1,000 has a negative payment, and it's all for future value. So that means that our future value is going to be $28,974.34. Okay? Make sense? So in other words, another way to look at that, another perspective, if you want to, you can almost think of this, from my perspective, is it's like a savings account. I put $10,000 in initially as my initial deposit. I've made initial deposits of $1,000 a year for 7 years. So my accumulated balance at the end of 7 years, earning 10% interest, is going to be $28,974. Okay, that's another way to look at it. Okay, now if we just look at it as raw cash that I've deposited is what? 10,000 plus 7,000, so 17,000 is all I have actually written checks for over the course of that 7 years. But in my account, at the end of that 7 years, is going to be 28,000. So I've gotten a little over $10,000, $11,000 worth of interest over that 7-year period. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay. Yep.
But if you
started off with $17,000, wouldn't he?
Okay, let's do
make
that.
it future value because
What's what we solved for? Was future value. Okay, but let's just say that we did that. Let's say that we took 17,000 as our present value at 10% for 7 years. Now, just out of curiosity, before we actually solve for future value, you tell me, is that going to be more or less than this? And why?
it should be more because
It's more.
yeah,
This is going to be more because someone just said you're starting with more, and so you've got more time to accumulate the interest. Okay, so let's just see what it actually is. $33,128.19. So if payment had instead insisted that I pay everything all up front and pay all 17,000 that I was going to owe him up front, he would have actually, in one sense, he would have gotten his money sooner. He could have invested it and earned about $5,000 or $6,000 more on the interest. There's another way to look at it. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes, no, possibly could be. Okay, moving forward. Okay, I believe the third
Present value.
type is a present value problem. Okay, all right, so once again, how many payments per year do you want? You tell me. We're creating a problem from scratch.
Quarterly.
How many?
Quarterly.
Quarterly. Let's go for it. So 4 payments per year. All right. Once again, let's just sort of look at this on a timeline perspective. We're going to be solving for present value. All right. So, all right. You've got to get this sort of start off interest rate. What interest rate do you want me to have? 7% interest rate. Okay. What else are you going to need to give me?
10 years.
Period, 10 years.
Period of 10 years. Okay. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice whenever you type in the 10 shift in, it's going to pop up in your display what? 40. Because it's 10 years times 4 payments per year, 40 total payments. Okay? All right? What else do you need to give me?
Future value.
Okay, give me a future value. So this is what the property is going to be worth at the end of 10 years. So what dollar amount?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
$100,000.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Put a decimal in every once in a while.
$123,456, future value.
I
Okay?
didn't remember.
All right? Okay, that is our future value. Okay, now, the question is, are we going to be content with that, or do we want some payments occurring there? You tell me. We don't have to have any. We can just simply solve for present value, or we can have some payments.
So we can just, if you want to add payments, we just put 2,000 payment?
Yeah,
Plus
and, but we got to determine whether it's going to be a positive or a negative, depending on the perspective.
Okay. And different question is, you know how sometimes you put 10 shift N?
Yep.
Sometimes you put 10 N.
All the time I put just 10 shift in. The only time I would put 10 in only
Okay.
is if it's absolutely, like if, for example, if it's annual compounding and I'm just not paying attention to what I'm doing and I'm putting 10 in only, or if it's 10 months. And so we got to indicate that it's just within a monthly compounding situation.
So when it's monthly, you don't put the shift?
Yeah, he said it's a habit.
You said it's a good habit.
It's just a good habit to get into.
Okay.
You'll make less mistakes, is my point.
Awesome.
Okay?
So can we, $2,000 payment?
Sure. Okay. Do you want to receive that payment or do you want to make that payment?
Quarter.
receive that payment will be just 2,000 payments, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just, to be clear, what is happening. Now, this is also sort of interesting. How often is that payment being received? Quarterly. So what's really happening is every, how many months is quarterly? Yep, but it's, okay. It's 4 times a year, but it's every 3 months.
Right.
Okay? So once every 3 months, I'm going to be receiving $2,000. Yes?
Yes.
4 times a year. So in essence, I'm receiving $8,000 a year. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes or no?
What if?
Be careful.
No.
I think I know where you're going, but go ahead.
Because the real life scenario you can have is where you're accumulating your interest, but you receive a payment annually.
I knew you were going there. Okay. And we can do that. But then what we have to do is what we had to do on the quiz for the 5895 last week, where you have a difference between the basically when the payment is occurring and what the compounding is. And so you're going to have to marry the two.
Got it.
Okay? All right. So $2,000 as the payment. Let's solve for present value. Should get a nice substantial number here. So let's see what we get. Yep. 118,867. Yeah, round it up to 20. Okay? So that means if we had spent that amount of money and we got back $2,000 every quarter for the next 10 years, and then we ultimately sold the property for the $123,000, this is what the value would be worth to us today. Okay? Make sense? All right?
In that scenario I described, so basically you would, if you took out the payments, that number would, that 118 would go down obviously, or go up, I'm sorry.
Well, let's just do that.
But
Okay?
then-
Let's just do 0 as payment, resolve for present value.
61.
What is it?
61, 678, 74. So then, if that was an annual payment coming in, then you would just do the payment, then the interest rates every year, then you just do the math together.
Okay. Everybody cool? Yep.
I'm sorry, the last part?
Okay.
One
He
second.
was asking is, what would happen if we got rid
Oh, okay.
of the $2,000 payment? So that basically just means making it a 0 payment,
Gotcha.
resolving for present value. So what we can actually say from this is that the value of that $2,000 payment would be the difference between $118,000 and $61,000. Okay? Make sense?
No. Looking for the FV, the future value,
Yep.
and for the PV, 133 and 118.
Yep.
And thinking about the 2,000 of payment during 10 years, it's 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
The PV is too high.
For there to be 0 payment.
I think maybe the PMT should be negative in this case.
No. Well, he wanted a positive PMT. Well, the calculation is correct, but the assumption here is that we are receiving this money, all of that money. If we had changed it to a negative, let's just do that. Okay, so we follow through here, and we make it a $2,000 negative payment, just changing the problem up. Oops. 7%. And
40,000.
2,000 as the negative. negative. Because what that's saying is if we spent this up front and we're having to spend $2,000 every quarter, then that is going to then accumulate to a value of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Does that make sense? So we flip the problem. This is why the positives and the negatives matter, because it's all about accounting for who is receiving money, who is making money.
Sometimes the wording of the question is kind of.
Well, okay.
That's the hard part.
The best way to deal with that is to always make it a scenario of putting you in the shoes of one or other party, and then somebody saying, am I receiving money? Am I paying money? And if you do that, you're very seldom ever going to get screwed up. It's not an issue that the wording is bad in the problem, it's an issue that you did not understand what you were doing. Okay? Okay. All right. So that did a present value. All right. The next one is to compound the future value of an annuity. Okay. Future value of an annuity. All right. So once again, how many payments per year do we want? Annual, monthly, quarterly? Monthly. Okay. So 12 payments per year. All right. Now, what we're solving for in this particular case, we're solving for the future value of an annuity, which is basically we're solving for future value. But what we're specifically solving for is we're solving for the value that we're either receiving or that we're paying out just in payments, okay? So we've kind of already done this, just kind of because we kind of incorporated some of that in the previous problems. So in this case, we know for certain we're going to have a payment piece into this because that is an annuity, okay? Now what term do we want to have in number of years or months? 10 years, okay? So 10 years is going to be how many months? 120. I'm trying to get you just, once again, your brain start thinking that way. 10 years times 12 months, 120 payments. Okay? What else do we need to know? Interest rate. Okay? What interest rate we want to use?
5%.
Okay? So, let's get to it. So, 5% interest rate, 10-year term, and this is monthly. So what is that monthly payment? Or, I'm sorry, okay. First of all, what is a payment? We didn't actually ever determine what a payment was. What payment do we want to make each month? $5,000 a month. Okay, and we want to make that payment, so that's going to be an out-of-pocket.
And you have to put the negative before the payment, right?
Yes. Okay. All right, so 5,000 payments and $776,411.40 will be our future value. Because if you think about it, $5,000 a month times 120 payments, just to do that simple math. $5,000 a month times 120, that's right in and of itself $600,000. Okay? And so the effect of the interest is adding basically another 176,000. Okay? Make sense? Okay? All right. Moving forward. Okay. Present value of an annuity. All right. So, once again, how many payments per year do you want?
One.
One. And we are going to be solving for ultimately present value. So now we got to fill in everything in the middle. We know we've got to have a payment because it's an annuity. Okay? So what dollar payment do we want to either make or receive? And first of all, you have to, okay, what's the dollar amount first that you want to use for the payment?
8,000.
8,000. Now, the question is, do we want to make that payment or do we want to receive that payment? What would you prefer? Receive it? Okay, we just leave it as 8,000 positive payment. Okay? Next piece, term. How many years? 5 years. Okay? What are we missing? Interest rate. Okay, so what interest rate do we want to use? 12. Okay, so that's solved for that present value. Okay.
The fact that it's a annuity, we don't have to use the beginning.
It is an annuity, not an annuity due. An annuity, it just simply means a fixed set of payments. And whenever they use the terminology annuity, they're implying an ordinary annuity. And all that just simply means the payments are going to be made or received at the end of the period in which it's occurring. Whereas when you see annuity due, that means it's not an ordinary annuity. It's an annuity due, which does mean the payments are made or received at the beginning of the period instead of the end of the period. So the key word to look for is the due part. Whenever it has DUE, that means it's due and payable right then and there at the beginning. Okay?
And that's when you use the beginning and end.
Correct. And as I said, 90+% are going to be ordinary annuities for our purposes, for real estate. Okay? And probably 99% of the things that are done in real estate are going to be either annual or monthly. It's very seldom that we do things quarterly or weekly or daily or anything else. It's almost all, monthly or annual.
Compounding interest is rare.
No, we sell compounded interest, but it's just going to be compounded on a monthly basis or an annual basis, not on a quarterly or semi-annual or daily or weekly. Now, the one interesting little caveat about that for real estate is that a lot of other countries, and those of you that are from other countries other than the U.S., in many cases, you pay your rent or your mortgage how often?
Once or twice a year.
Once or twice a year?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I was going to say once a week. Okay. Whenever I was living in Australia and New Zealand, it was once a week. Everything was based weekly. So in that case, if you think about that, there are 52 weeks in a year. You automatically, this is kind of just an interesting little brain teaser just for a second. How many months are there in a year? 12. Okay? How many weeks are there in a month? Well, see, that's the thing. There really aren't 4. We think there are 4, but there really aren't. Because if we take 4 times 12, what is that? 48 weeks, yes? So what's the missing 4 weeks?
1 quarter. So
Okay.
Holidays.
It's like a leap month, yes. No, but seriously, it's only because if you think of it, you're automatically assuming a month is 28 days. But obviously, most of our months have either 30 days or 31 days, with the exception of obviously February with the whole leap year thing. But the point with that is it's interesting because if you do quote rent on a weekly basis. Like for example, I'm not trying to digress here too much, but I was just think about this for a second. If you say your rent is $200 a week, instinctively we would say that's the equivalent of $800 a month, because we're simply saying 4 weeks per month. Yes? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Whereas if we take that $200 a week times 52,
10,400.
I'm just going to do it just because okay, so that's 10,400 for the year, but then we divide that by 12. So in reality, the real actual rental rate is $866 a month. But yet, those of us that are naive Americans going to other countries where it's quoted weekly, we're thinking it's really only 800. But it's a significant difference, was my point.
Do you pay twice a year? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, we receive we get 1 check or 2 checks maximum every 6 months, or we get upfront too. Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
A month.
Works for me. All right, but you get the general idea. So once again, those are rare sort of circumstances of where you do things weekly, or you, in some cases, will do them maybe once or twice a year. Okay. All right, moving forward. All right, the next sort of problem: accumulation of a future sum. Okay. This is the kind of problem. It's basically, it's a future value problem. Okay, just to sort of start with that. You're accumulating a fixed dollar amount. And the kind of problems that you saw in the sample problems, this was the sort of thing, and for real estate, these are like capital reserves. Okay? Like, for example, whenever you buy a property, let's say an apartment community, you know, yeah, you're going to get your mortgage, yeah, you're going to, you know, obviously want to set aside some money on a regular, consistent basis to build up capital reserves to then be able to use for maybe big items. Like, for example, that you know every 10 years, let's say, you're going to have to replace the air conditioners. Or you know you're going to have to replace the refrigerators. Or you know you're going to have to replace the roof. Or you know you're going to have to replace the carpet. Or you know you're going to have to replace, you know, there are certain items that naturally are going to wear out over time with virtually any type of rental property. And if you're the owner of that property, specifically residential property, you're more than likely going to be responsible for those items. Well, what you don't want to have happen is that whenever those big expenditures all of a sudden come due, that 5 years, 10 years down the road, you don't want to go be knocking on the door of your lender and saying, hey, I need some more money to pay for these refrigerators, for these air conditioners, for this carpet, for these hot water heaters. Your lender is not going to be happy about that. Okay? So, this is an extremely important lesson as we sort of talk about this. Normally, most commercial lenders will have you, in addition to whatever your monthly mortgage payment is, set aside a specific either dollar amount or percentage for these sort of capital reserves. And the whole idea behind it is just so that you will have that money available whenever those sort of items wear out that you need to replace. Does that make sense? So just sort of be aware of that. Now, the purpose for this problem is to figure out how much money we would actually have to set aside each month or each year in order to accumulate the money that we need to pay for whatever that item or items may be. So, first of all, do we want to make this a monthly thing? Sure. That we're going to be setting aside the money, that is. Okay? And we know we're going to be solving for future value because it's the accumulation of sort of a fixed sum at some point in the future. All right? How many years do we want to have to set aside money? 5 years. Okay? All right, so carpet might be a good example of that. Every 5 years, maybe you need to change out the carpet, depending on the kind of property. Okay. All right, so 5 years and interest rate on this. Now, see, this is an interesting thing because technically, these should be interest-bearing accounts. But usually what they will do is they will, say, okay, you're going to deposit this into some sort of like an interest-bearing account, but usually the interest is not going to be that much. You may get lucky, you may be able to put it into something that, that might earn a couple of percent, but in the most recent history of sort of lending, that percentage is probably not going to be that much. So we're going to go with something ridiculously conservative and say 2% is the interest that we're going to have there. Okay, now, how much are we going to potentially set aside?
25,000.
How much?
25,000?
That's ridiculous.
Each month?
2,500.
Okay, 4,500, let's say. We're going to set aside
Well,
as a payment.
can we do this in a different way?
We can do it several different ways.
Like,
For example, we know that the price of an air conditioning on a roof would cost $10,000. So
Yep,
we can
okay,
say that
we
the
can
price
do
of
it.
value of a roof would cost $15,000.
Okay, let's do it that way. All right. I'm fine with that.
I already wrote it down.
erase it.
Okay. So if we're going to do it that way, then in essence we're starting with the future value. We're saying we need to accumulate a specific amount, and that specific amount might be, what dollar amount we want to?
15,000. Oh,
15?
actually,
Okay.
do 100,000 for a big roof.
Okay, 150,000. How's that? I've already started writing. Okay, 150,000 is going to be the amount that we need to accumulate. Okay? All right. So if that's the amount that we need to accumulate, now what we're going to be solving for, in essence, over that 5-year period, only getting 2% interest, how much are we going to have to set aside each month? $23.79.16. Okay, so from that property, every month we would need to deposit into this account $2,379. It would earn 2% interest. At the end of 5 years, we would have $150,000 sitting in that account that we would then be able to use to pay for whatever this big item is that Jose wants us to buy.
Hopefully that doesn't sound dumb. The 150,000 is like an annuity?
No,
If that's the ending?
no, the $150,000 is the lump sum we need to accumulate,
Reserve.
the reserve that we need to accumulate. Okay? All right, moving forward. Woo, perpetuities. Okay. What's a perpetuity? Forever. Yes. Okay. A for the day. All right. Perpetuity is receiving or making a payment forever. The best example of this is, let's say, well, to a certain extent, but actually perpetuity even goes beyond death. Okay? So a perpetuity, a good example would be like setting up a scholarship fund. Okay? You graduate from the program, you become infinitely rich, and you decide, okay, I'm going to give $1 million back to the university to use for scholarships for future students. Okay? Well, the question is, number one, how much are you going to be able to give away each year without ever touching the principal? Okay? And at what interest rate is that perpetuity going to earn? So, let's just say we're talking about $1 million.
You're gonna need a lot more than that for this school.
So $1 million, let's say, is going to be the donation. All right? How much is that donation going to earn in interest each year? The university is going to stick it into some sort of an interest-bearing account, and it's going to earn, actually they do pretty well. They get, let's say, about 5%. Okay? So at 5%, what's that going to be? $50,000. Well, now, here's the thing. That $50,000 a year is forever. Once they have $1 million, every year it's going to throw off 5%. Yes? Okay. So $50,000, $50,000, $50,000 for 1 million years into the future, if necessary, okay? And you're never going to touch the original $1 million, okay? So that makes sense to everybody, okay? Now, another example of this, as we're getting close to Halloween, this is a good one, is a perpetual care fund fee for cemeteries. Everybody thought about this?
No.
Okay, well, you know, a normal cemetery, in the old days, well, obviously you had upright, you know, cemetery, you know, the monuments, headstones, and then but you had to pay somebody to do what? Go around and cut the grass, yes? Well, where does that money come from? Well, most cemeteries have set up what is called a perpetual care fund fee. So that whenever you buy the cemetery burial plot, a portion of that money goes into basically a trust fund. And then that trust fund, whatever interest that it throws off, is hopefully enough to be able to pay the folks to be able to landscape the property in perpetuity. Does that make sense? Okay, same general concept. All right? Okay, so the simple little formula for this is our really good friend, Irv. Do you remember Irv? All right, so in this case, the value of the perpetuity is $1 million. The interest rate is 5%, meaning that the income that it throws off is $50,000. So Irv is really nothing more than the formula for perpetuity, because you're making the assumption that income is going to occur forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Now, having just said that, one of the things, you know, obviously about real estate is the land may last forever, but the improvements on the land don't necessarily last forever. So those are going to depreciate over time. You're going to have to renovate and so forth, so on. But that's a whole other piece that we'll get into really in the investments course. But right now, all we're really sort of focused on is just simply from a perpetuity perspective, if I give you any two of those three variables, you should be able to solve for the third. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in other words, if I just simply said, all right, the income that's thrown off by the perpetuity is $50,000 a year at a 5% interest rate, and you should be able to take $50,000 divided by 5%, that's going to give you $1 million. Okay? Or if I said the income is $50,000 a year, the value is $1 million, then 50,000 divided by 1 million is going to give you 5%. If I give you the rate of 5% times the value of 1 million, you should be able to get the income of 50,000. Make sense? Okay. Yep.
Does that adjust for inflation?
That is where you use the Gordon growth model. Okay? The Gordon growth model will incorporate basically an annual growth rate, and what that ends up being is basically instead of using R down here, you actually do R minus G, which is the growth rate. And whenever you do that, that automatically, I know it's counterintuitive. So whenever you see that, you're like, no. But it's accurate, trust me on this. Like, for example, let's just do this. Let's say the growth rate is 1% a year.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, what that's going to do is it's going to be 5% minus 1%, which is going to be 4%. Well, then if all of a sudden we can do it either way, but if we keep our income constant, 50,000 divided by 0.04, then that means the value is going to be 1.25 million. Or if we work it the other way, our income is going to be 40,000. Okay? But that growth rate will ultimately be reflected, if you will, from a standpoint of an inflation sort of thing. That's making the assumption that we are, in essence, growing the value of the perpetuity. Okay, by 1%. All right, moving on. All right, I think that gets us to what, number 8?
So
Yep.
perpetuity of the OSHA user, correct?
Yep. Okay. Okay, here, investments with single receipts or calculating a rate of return. So here, what are we solving for? The interest rate. Okay? So in this case, let's just sort of start off once again. Monthly or annual? Monthly. Okay? And in this case, we can pick a future value and pick a present value. So let's start off with present value. What do we want our present value to be?
1 million.
1 million. And we're going to make that an outflow that we're buying the property for $1 million. All right? How long are we going to hold it? 5 years or 60 months. And how much are we going to sell it for? 3 million. I like the way you think. Okay, good. Triple the value. Okay. Now, what we're going to then be solving for is the rate of return or the interest rate. Okay, so let's see what we get. Okay, at 22.175%. Okay, make sense? Okay, so 22% return annualized over 5 years.
And if you don't put the plus and minus, you won't get the right answer.
That is correct.
Right.
Because if you put both of them as positive, once again, as I said earlier, it's like money falling from the sky, and you're going to get an infinite return, therefore no solution. Okay? All right. Next one. Yields on investment annuities. So what does this sound like? This sounds like basically you're going to get some income, and you're going to potentially have to pay something for that income, but we want to figure out what is your rate of return. Okay? So, in this case, we want to do this monthly or annual?
It's like a bond, no?
Potentially, yeah. Okay, we're going to do it monthly. That's what I hear. And once again, we're going to be solving for the interest rate. All right, so how many years? 7 years. Okay, so in this case, what we're saying is we're either going to be making or we're going to be receiving payments monthly. So do we want to make payments or do we want to receive payments? Receive, okay? What dollar amount do we want to receive each month? $1,500 per month received. Okay? So now the question is, so think of this. We're a landlord. We are leasing our property for 7 years, and we are charging $1,500 a month for the lease rate. The question is, how much is that lease worth to us potentially today? Well, that's not what we're solving for. What we're solving for is what is the rate of return that we're going to get off of that lease. So let's just kind of think about this just for a second. $1,500 a month. What's that per year? $1,500 per month times 12 would be $18,000 a year. Yes? Times 7 years. So in total, we're going to be receiving $126,000 worth of hard cash currency over this time period. But if we were to enter $126,000 plus or minus payment, or I'm sorry, present value, we would get 0. as our rate of return because there's no return. We're simply getting back what we've invested. So in order to get a return that's going to be higher than 0, we've got to be getting back something greater than 126,000. Now I'm kind of over-analyzing the question, but I'm just trying to get you to start thinking about the logic. So what dollar amount, if we want a positive return, we're going to put something in greater than 126,000. So how much?
150.
150. You were thinking the same number I was. All right. All right, so 150,000. So let's see what we get. Well, in this case, whoops, I screwed up. This is my mistake.
It should be less, right?
It should be less, not more. So 126,000 would have been 0, but if we're investing more than 126, that's going to make our return negative. Okay? My brain, my logic, I screwed up. But let's go ahead and do it. It ends up being negative 4. What was it? Negative 4.78. Okay? So that is telling us we're paying too much for that investment, and we're in essence getting a negative return. So we said 126,000 was the number that we would have gotten if it would have been a 0% return. Just go with something less. Let's go with 100,000. Okay. .81%. Okay? And once again, if we had put in 126,000, this is proof that I'm not completely off my rocker. 126,000 plus minus, and then solve for interest rate. Let's see if we get 0, just to make sure. Yep, 0. Okay. All right, moving on. Last one.
What was the interest that came out on that?
Minus 4.78.
That was the first time. What about the second time?
Okay. Internal rate of return. All right. So, the internal rate of
the other one for a second, because I keep getting 6.95, and you got 6.1 something,
6.81.
81, only 95. 4 payments a year,
Yes.
7 payments a year, 1,500 positive payment, 100,000.
Can you punch it in again, make sure I didn't screw it up.
And then you get a future value, right?
No, that's the present value.
Ah,
Okay, that's what it was.
okay.
Okay. All right, internal rate of return. Okay, so if you remember from last week, this is where we have a series of cash flows, usually different dollar amounts each month or each year, and then we use the cash flow function in order to solve for internal rate of return. Okay, so in this case, this is, once again, we're going to start off just like we do with every single problem, monthly or annual.
And
Annual. Okay? In this case, the cash flows. Now, let's go over here and let's just kind of do a timeline. Let's say for 5 years. All right? Let's start off with how much do we want to spend on this particular property. We're going to buy the property. How much do we want to spend?
45.
How much?
45.
4,500?
Million.
Million. Oh, I'm sorry.
Baller, man. Class A
It's like, are we going to buy a vacant lot in a
Class
really
A
bad
apartments
neighborhood or
in
what?
Atlanta,
Okay.
Georgia.
45 million. Okay. Okay. So $45 million cash expenditure is going to be our purchase price. Okay. Now, the question is, how much are we going to generate in rent each of those 5 years? And is that going to be sufficient to pay us back, or are we going to have to sell the property at the end of 5 years and have a reversion value? Okay? So more than likely, we're going to rent it for 5 years, sell the property, have a reversion value, and that's going to help us with the problem. Okay. So how much do we want to earn in income each year?
20.
How much?
20 million.
Okay.
That should be right, right?
So if we do 20 million, well, but we don't want it to be the same dollar amount each year. So I'm just going to pick some random-ish numbers. So we're going to say 25 million the next year. So right there, if we just stop with that, we've paid back what we originally spent. Yes?
Right.
So starting in the third year, we're pretty much going to be, it's going to be profit, if you will. All right? But let's just say that it drops off precipitously, and we go to maybe 5 million for the third year, 2 million for the next year, and maybe 1 million for the final year.
Reversion.
Okay, reversion is simply reverting, or in essence, it's selling the property. And you have the proceeds revert back to you, okay? And so the idea of a reversion value is, like for example, if you spent $45 million on a property, and then 5 years later, not with this example, but 5 years later, you sold the property for $50 million, the reversion would be that $50 million back to you.
But the full amount.
Whatever the dollar amount is of the sale, the reversion would go back to you. Minus your mortgage, minus other things, but the reversion would go back to you. It's just a term that we use as opposed to sale price, as opposed to profit, as opposed to a lot of other terms. Reversion has its own implicit meaning within real estate investment, and it just simply means that that whatever you're selling the property for, the sales proceeds minus your mortgage, minus all other costs, is the reversion value. Okay? Okay, so for this particular set of cash flows, they're kind of wonky in their sort of structure. We're just going to put them in as follows. You're going to put in 45 million as a negative cash flow, because that's cash flow for time period 0. The 20 million as an ordinary cash flow. 25 million. $5 million. 2 million. And 1 million. And then we're going to simply solve for internal rate of return. Okay? Okay, I end up with a 9.43% internal rate of return.
What's that about? Shift what? IRR?
Shift IRR for the year, which is underneath the CST button. Second row, third key over. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so here's the way it's going to work. All right, so I'm going to give you out 2 pieces of paper. First, I'm giving you out just your answer sheet. You keep everything on your desk. Go ahead and put your name on the answer sheet. Top left, because you didn't put the first one in as a negative.
It's got full 0, right?
Yep.
Mine.
And once again, the quiz is open book, open notes. Okay. You know the word, did you get one? Okay. Now, look at your name, top left-hand corner of the answer sheet. You'd be surprised how many people don't do that. Let's go ahead and do that, get that out of the way. I'll explain how this is going to work. Okay, the quiz. It's 10 questions. All calculations, all very similar to what we have just done. And what I will do in terms of time is there is a maximum time for this first quiz, which is 30 minutes. So that basically means 3 minutes per question. Okay? So if you feel like you're spending more than 3 minutes per question, you need to move on. Okay? Future quizzes, we'll try to compress that time to about 20 minutes or so. But at least for the first one, I'll give you a little bit of extra time. I'll kind of take a look around and sort of see, how everybody's doing. If at 30 minutes, everybody's still working on it, okay, I may give you a few extra minutes, but that's probably not going to be the case. Some of you will finish it and it'll be done in 5 minutes, okay? Others of you, it may take, like I said, a little bit longer. That's okay. Now, the answers, all I want is the numerical answer in the box. That's all I need. I don't need how you worked it, what your work was. All I want to know is the answer, okay? That's all that's going to be marked right or wrong, all right? There is one right answer for each question. Now, other thing, again, you can use any of your notes. You can use your textbook, okay? You can't use your computer. That's the only thing that's basically off the table. You can't use your computer, can't use your phones, okay? Because I can't have you texting each other, can't have you potentially taking pictures, blah, 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 so no phones. But you can use your calculator, you can use your textbook, you can use your notes. Everybody clear on that? Yes or no? Okay? Now,
Professor,
Yep.
the process of the questions, you have like a step by step, right? So if you do it's 5 steps to get the answer, for example.
right.
If you do 4 steps right and 1 step wrong,
It's wrong. Just think about it like this. Would you want to go to a lender or to work with a business partner that got 4 out of 5 steps wrong?
No, but that's what we hear, so we can learn, so we make
No,
those
but that's the whole
mistakes
idea.
here.
But the
And
only
then
way
we
for
don't
me to
make it
gauge,
outside, right? That's
the only way for me to gauge whether or not you really know it or not is for you to get it correct. It's irrelevant to me if you get a wrong answer, because that's pointless.
That's one way to do it, right?
Well, then you do better on the next test or the next quiz. That's the whole idea behind it. That's why I set it up the way that I do. But if you absolutely get a 0 on this quiz, you in essence are able to retake it as a test. And with that test, then that grade will replace the quiz. But the test, the difference is, the test is closed book, closed notes. Only thing you get to use is your calculator. Okay, so this is kind of like you get a free view of what you're going to be exposed to on the test with the quiz. Now, what will probably happen as a matter of course from all the years I've taught this, okay, for 30 years of teaching this stuff, my expectation is about 75% of you will come close to acing the quiz and will not need to take the test, okay? The other 25% of you will probably take the test and hopefully will do better on the test than you did on the quiz, okay? that's just, once again, from years and years and years of doing this. Okay? Everybody good? All right. Here we go.
Here. Be nice.
You write on this?
Yes. You have to put your name on it as well.
Just here, the answers on the first.
Yep. As I said, 30 minutes. So that'll be 10 after. Yep, you can write all over those two pieces of paper. One little thing, I'm going to interrupt you because it's your first quiz. What I would do before you do anything else on the quiz is I would go through for each of the 10 questions, and I would put out in the margin, is this annual compounding? Is this monthly compounding? I would write like either a 1 or a 12, just so that you don't make that mistake. whenever you're done, you can just bring the quiz and the quiz sheet, the answer sheet, both of them, up to me, and I'll grade them so that you can see what you did.
It was in beginning. Because of the files in beginning.
10 minutes or so. Okay, it's officially been 30 minutes, but I'm gonna give you 5 more minutes. Okay, we've got about a minute left. Still am waiting on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you.
We'll go over it after, right?
No. Okay. Let me do this. Okay. Who's next?
Were you in touch with President? Are you calling for what?
Yeah.
What, fifth?
No,
Fifth.
my new grandpa is calling.
You're the third.
No, my dad is not.
We're doing all of that now.
I'm the second. So.
Paul? Yeah. Yours?
Yeah. Hey, Joe.
You come up
Here
with
you have the, barely see it.
Question sheet?
Yeah, here I have the formula, how it
the point of
defines.
the presentation?
No, that's for final grade based on test. And here, you will have to plug in the presentation, every class, every poll, boxes, plug in the grades. So for example, we got a 90.
It's Tuesday. No, I'm sorry. It's okay. I just don't like waiting.
Okay.
I don't want the ball rolling. If I need to go over there and be like,
Oh, I'm sorry.
With both of them, you know,
let's just go knock on a door. Break some coffee or something.
yeah,
Like, hey, I exist. This is what I have. Yeah.
yeah.
I understand.
And
Let me know when you
All right. So we had at least one perfect score, multiple 90s, a few 80s, a couple 60s. So all in all, good job.
You curve it, I hope, right?
No, not at all.
Okay,
So
let's get started.
plug in the tests, plug in your physics, plug in your quizzes. Based on tests, you gotta do math.
All right, so what we're going to do now
Choose what.
is basically we're going to jump into the new material, which in essence deals with fixed rate mortgages, and which obviously in terms of the quiz will come next week. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get an early start on that, so it gives you time to kind of reflect and let some of that information sink in. So in essence, at this point, just so if you're keeping your notes, trying to keep them separate, this is where you'll start taking notes for quiz number 2. Okay, so fixed rate mortgages is our next topic, and what we do here is we sort of take a look at starting off with a very basic, simple, sort of traditional fixed rate mortgage, And then we complicate it, okay? We complicate it by adding in loan origination fees. We complicate it by adding in prepayment penalties. We complicate it by adding in servicing fees, and then talking about each of those as we sort of go through the process. But the first thing that we sort of will just kind of begin with is just talking a little bit about this basic sort of fixed rate mortgage. Now, first of all, most mortgages are going to be 12 payments per year. And we're going to start off with just a $100,000 mortgage. And let's say that we've got a 30-year term, which is going to be standard for a lot of traditional residential mortgages, and in some cases commercial mortgages as well, but 30 years or 360 months, okay? Very seldom are you going to see an amortization period greater than 30 years. There are a handful of instances, if you get out there and you Google and you look around, there are a handful of mortgages of where some lenders have gone with some 40-year and 50-year terms, but those are by no means, in any stretch of the imagination, the norm. They're usually set up that way, and a lot of them are in California for residential properties, and the reason they're set up with these ridiculously long terms is to try to get the monthly payment down low enough to where it's affordable, okay? But the reality is, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean, 30 years is a nice term because you think about it, you know, why 30 years? Well, you know, if you take the average ordinary person, you know, let's say they start working somewhere in their 20s, maybe they buy their first house either at 25 or at 30, then by the time they're 55 or 60, approaching retirement age, hopefully they have their home paid off, okay? And that was kind of the general sort of thought process, you know, for this 30-year mortgage. Now, for commercial properties, most commercial properties have an amortization period of 15 years, okay? Although there are plenty that are out there that have 20, 25, and in some cases 30 years, but most commercial mortgages you're going to see with a 15-year amortization period, okay? Now, so we have this 30-year term, and I'm going to go with a really high interest rate, just because I know all the numbers by heart, 10% interest rate, which actually was the going interest rate whenever I first started teaching this course in the 1980s, and so I've stuck with that number in my head for all these years because I can remember that the monthly payment is $877.57, okay? So your monthly payment, $877.57, and that is going to be the payment that you're going to pay for 360 months. Now, a couple of little things that we want to try to do to make sure that you understand what's really going on in terms of principal versus interest is, let's just take that number for a moment, multiply it by 360, just to see what the total actual out-of-pocket costs are for that mortgage. Yeah, $315,925.20. Okay, so for that $100,000 mortgage with interest, you're paying $315,925. Now, if you're paying attention, we've talked about this. What dollar amount is principal? 100. So if we subtract out 100,000 from that, in other words, the loan amount, then that means of that total amount that we're paying, $215,925.20 is interest. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. How does that interest number get so big? Because of the compounding effect of the interest rate. And if you actually take a look, which we're going to do, at how much of your first few payments are actually made up of principal and interest, and how little of those payments goes toward reducing the principal balance, it's really disturbing. In this case, if my memory serves me correctly, out of the very first payment you make, I believe it's like $44.24 goes to principal. The remaining $833.33 goes to interest.
How did you come up with that 44 again?
I know it by memory. Okay? All right. But to do it, let me show you. Okay? So, first of all, if we take 100,000 and we multiply that by the interest rate of 10% divided by 12, because it's obviously monthly, okay? So 100,000 times 0.10 divided by 12, you should get 833.33, which is the interest portion. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes? Okay? So that gives us that number. To get the principal portion, all we do is just subtract one from the other. We take 877.57, subtract out 833.33, that's going to give us the 44.24. Does that make sense? Now your calculator will give you all of this, by the way, without having to do that. Okay? We can use what's called our amortization function. All right? So, as an example, once we've put in all the normal loan information here, okay, we can just sort of skip forward and specifically do as follows. Put in 1, and we're going to use a new key on the calculator, input. It's on the left-hand side, second key down. And I'll explain this. 1 input 1, shift, amortize. That key is in the upper right-hand corner below the future value key. Equal, equal, equal. Now let me explain what this particular function is doing. All right? 1 input 1. Okay, think of your calculator all of a sudden as a memory bank. All right? And once you have put in the loan information for this particular loan, $100,000 loan, 10%, 30 years, you've calculated the payment of $877.57, now you can go into the calculator's memory bank and say, for any period of time, give me the principal paid, the interest paid, and the ending balance. And so, to recall, just for the first period, or in this case the first month, we would do 1 through 1, or 1 input 1. And that's going to basically say to the calculator, give me only month number 1 through month number 1. Okay? Then we do the shift, amortize. So now we're accessing this amortization function within the calculator, and we're going to show you how to do this by hand as well. But just right now, we're accessing that function, the amortization function, and then you're going to hit the equal key. So let's see what happens. Okay. Once again, make sure you got your loan information in there. Okay, once again, $100,000 present value, 10% interest rate, 30 years, solve for payment, get $877.57 negative. All right, then 1, input 1, shift, amortize, equal. And it's going to give you, up in the upper kind of left-hand corner of the calculator, it's going to say PRIN for principal. And it's going to give you negative 44.24 rounded. You hit the equal the first time. When you hit the equal again, now it's going to give you the interest, 833.33. You hit the equal key again, now it's going to give you the ending balance on the loan after 1 month. In this case, $99,955.76. So that is the balance at end of month 1. Okay, is everybody clear on that? Yes or no? Now, let's talk about this for a second. You made your first payment to the bank. Your payment was $877.57. Yes? That was the amount of the check you gave to the bank. It was $877.57. But only $44.24 went toward reducing the balance of the loan. Okay? The other $833.33 is just simply, that's interest that they collected. Is everybody clear on that? Yes or no? So whenever you calculate the balance, all you're subtracting out is the $44.24 from the $877.57. Does that make sense? Now, if that doesn't become intuitively obvious at the moment, it will a little bit later when we actually put together an actual amortization schedule. Yep.
For principal, keep getting 833.20. I'm not getting 44.24.
Let me look. Okay, that's what you put something wrong, because it's giving you both that or so you don't want to put the problem in it again.
There. Just got here. Just take that quick.
Okay, you got to solve the payment first. Okay, so one mistake, and this is not an uncommon mistake, is whenever you put your loan information in, before you can use the amortization function, you must first solve for the payment, because the calculator needs to know what it is we're working with. And so if you leave that piece of it out, the calculator is kind of like, where do we go from here? Okay? So you've got to make sure that you're solving for that.
Thank you.
All right.
Dr. Foggy,
Yep.
one input one, what am I telling the calculator? One?
Okay. You're telling the calculator period number 1 through period number 1. So if it's monthly, which in this case it is, it's month number 1 through month number 1.
So if
it was annual, it would be year number 1 through year number 1.
So if I want to calculate how much principal and interest I paid over the last 24 months, I can just go from
One input 24.
24, right?
If you want to know for the first, let's say, 10 years, one input 120. But what if you wanted to know for just year 2 alone? 13 input 24.
13.4, yeah.
Or what if you just wanted to know the last 6 months of the first year? 7 input 12. Okay? So you've just got to think about, logically, what period of time that you're sort of searching for the data that you're searching for, and it depends on what what is the purpose of that.
So the start and end period.
I'm sorry?
The start and end.
Yes. All you're really, you're putting in the start period and you're putting in the end period. That's all you're doing. Okay? Moving forward. All right. Now, while we're here, what the heck? Let's go ahead and just sort of show you by hand how to put together a basic amortization schedule. Okay? By hand. All right. So for this particular loan, we've got our information that we've already sort of put in, but in order to do this by hand, what is an amortization schedule going to look like? Well, first of all, you're going to have your payment number, okay, or period number, either or. Period or payment number. And in this case, it's going to be like month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down, in this case, to 360 months. Okay, so that's going to be your first column. Okay, now, as you get really excited about this, then in the next class, starting at 12:30, we're going to build one of these in Excel, okay? So you're going to see this again in a little bit of a different form. But the next column over is going to be the beginning balance of the loan in that particular period. Okay? Then the next column is going to be the payment amount. Next column, and sometimes depending on kind of how one person chooses to set it up, whether they want to put the principal first or they want to put the interest first, this can vacillate back and forth, but we'll go ahead and put interest paid, and then principal repaid, and then ending balance. Okay? So this is a setup for just a normal, simple loan amortization. Whether you get a car loan, you get a home loan, you get any kind of loan, this is pretty much how it's set up. Okay? You start off with the beginning balance of the loan. So in this particular case, with the loan that we are playing around with, we have a beginning balance in that first month of $100,000. Make sense, everybody? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, we've already calculated with our calculator the payment amount, which is $877.57. Well, that's going to be the same amount for a fixed rate mortgage all the way down.
You know what the formula is to calculate the payment without using the financial calculator?
I do, but it's a bit rough. Okay? And, I mean, it's in your book, we can do it, but it will eat up a lot of time. Because it's not a simple one. Okay. All right, so calculating now in this case, the interest paid, we're going to use what we did before. So in that first situation, we took the $100,000, which was our loan balance, times the interest rate of 10% divided by 12, and we got the $833.33. So that is our interest paid and how we got it. Is everybody clear on that? Yes or no? Okay. Now there's a method to my madness in working through this, and you will hopefully see here in a moment. Okay. So in order to get the principal repaid, all we have to do is just subtract the interest paid from the payment amount. All right? So the principal repaid is going to be $44.24. All right? Now to get the ending balance, we're taking the beginning balance minus the principal repaid. Okay? So that's where we got the $99,955. Wasn't it 76?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, that becomes our new balance. Okay? That makes sense, everybody?
Yeah.
All right? So now we know what our payment is, but now our interest. You're saying, oh, well, we just basically go and we use this again. No, because now we have a new balance, so we got to calculate the new interest. Okay? So it's kind of a pain in the backside to have to do this, but, and this is where, once again, the calculator and Excel, help us out, but let's just go ahead and do it for this one, just to sort of show the process. And you should get $832.96. Do I follow?
You gonna go through the whole thing again, or?
I'm going to go through one more line.
No, I mean, to to do the new payment, the interest principal portion, you gotta just do the 2 input 2? Or-
Yeah, yes, you can.
You did 10%.
Okay? But I'm doing it all by hand up here is what I'm saying. Okay? So, taking now the 877.57, so that means our principal repaid was around $44.61. Okay? Everybody following the math?
Yeah.
Okay, all I'm trying to do, I'm not trying to get you hung up on the math, but I'm trying to get you hung up on the logic, not hung up, but I'm trying to get you clear on the logic as to what's going on. All right? And then now our ending balance will be $99,911.15, okay, which then will come back over here, $99,911.15. Once again, go down here, do the math, so forth, so on. Okay, you get the general idea, yes? Okay. Now, using the calculator to do it, as you brought up, or Michael brought up, if we wanted to fill in those numbers, let's take a look and see if we did it right for month number 2. As he mentioned, all you should have to do is, once you've got all the information in for the loan, is now to access month 2, is do 2, input 2, shift, amortize, equal, I get 44.61, there we go, equal again, 832.96, yep, and 99,911.15. Okay, so good. All right, just double check to make sure that it works. Okay, so for the month 3, let's do that. 3, input 3, shift, amortize, equal. All right, so 44 and 98, 832.59, and 99,866.18. Okay. Which then becomes, once again, our new beginning balance over here. Okay, now we can do month 4. So, 4 input 4, shift, amortize, equal, 45, 35, 832, 22, 99, 820, 82. Okay, he's already getting into the rhythm on that. Okay? All right, and then for month 5.
Is there a way to just move to the next month instead of having to type in like the inputs?
Not that I'm aware of. It does just cycle through the same one over and over again.
Yeah.
If you keep it equal, but I don't believe there's a way to just like go automatically to the next one.
Okay.
All right? So the next one, in this case, 5 input 5. And the reality is, you're not going to be doing this that often because obviously you're going to be building this in Excel and doing it instantaneously. This is really just to kind of show you how you can do it on the calculator. Okay, so 45, 73, and then 831, 84. Ending balance 99,775.09. Okay. Now, just for fun, let's do 360 input 360 to get that very last month. 360 input 360. Shift, amortize, equal. Okay. Now it switches. And so our principal paid is the bigger number, $870.32. Our interest is only $7.25, and our balance is 0.
$3.40.
Well, mine ends up being 0. Oh, did you ever calculate only set for 2 decimal places? Mm-hmm. Okay. One other little trick using the calculator. Okay. To set what I do is I have mine constantly set for 9 decimal places, and the way that you do that is you hit the shift key, and then underneath the equal key is DISP, which stands for display. And then right after that, whatever number that you type in this case 9, that will then kick out your decimal places to 9 decimal places. But if you want to just round everything off to 2 decimal places, you can do shift display 2, and it'll cut everything off at 2 decimal places. Okay? Now the downside with that, especially whenever you're doing these mortgage calculations, is sometimes allowing your calculator to carry everything out to the extreme, then you're not going to get the rounding error at the end.
When you hit after the number.
That's it.
No, the shift display.
9.
Oh, I must have something.
Okay. All right. Moving forward. All right. So, okay. So at this point, talked a little bit about the fixed rate mortgage. We went through an example of the fixed rate mortgage. We showed you kind of a basic and helped you work through a basic amortization schedule, understanding how to calculate the interest, how to back into the principal amount, how to get the ending balance. Okay, everybody kosher with that. Now, let's sort of talk about, for a moment, kind of a little bit of history and talk about how we ended up with fixed rate mortgages to begin with and what there was in play before fixed rate mortgages. So, what I'm going to title this is History of Mortgages, according to me. All right. For the longest period of time, you had people who would borrow money and they would work out some sort of a relationship with whoever they borrowed it from and, you know, pay them some rate of interest, usually simple interest, and in many cases, interest-only mortgages, okay? And this was pretty much the case up until the early 1900s, that you had what were referred to, well, or at least what are referred to now, as interest-only or simple interest mortgages. Now, any of you that have ever watched any of these old sort of spaghetti westerns, and they talk about, you know, the evil banker taking away, foreclosing the property of the farmer or the rancher, in most cases, these were interest-only mortgages. And you're saying, okay, why? Why does this matter? Where are you going with this? Okay, follow me on the logic train. The way that interest-only mortgage works is, let's say that I'm the lender, okay? You come to me and say, all right, I want to borrow money to build out my family farm, my ranch, okay? And I say, great. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to loan you, let's say, $100,000, and you're going to pay me simple interest or 10% a year on that $100,000. So what that means is every year, Paul's going to come into me sometime during the year. It could be monthly, could be quarterly, could be annually. And Paul's going to have to give me how much money each year? Okay? Paul's going to give me $10,000 a year in interest. Is everybody comfortable with that? Okay? Does that make sense? Yes or no? Yeah. Okay. Now, that's okay. Paul can, you know, do whatever he has to do with his crops, you know, sell off, you know, some cattle, build whatever he's going to build. Everything is going great, you know, several years into this. But chances are, as the lender, I have probably said, there's going to be a fixed term for this loan. In other words, I'm not just going to allow you to pay me $10,000 a year in interest forever and ever as a perpetuity, I'm going to put a fixed date that the loan is going to come due. Now that might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, it might be 15 years. But usually the duration was fairly tight. And there was sadly a lot of corruption that went into this, because the lender is basically saying, if I put a 5-year term on this interest-only mortgage, here's what's going to happen. Well, first of all, at the end of 5 years, what does happen? You've got to pay back in full the entire $100,000. Well, what does that mean you're going to have to do at the end of 5 years? Either basically do what we talked about earlier, either sell the property, cash out of it, refinance it with the lender who's going to be, at this point, probably unwilling to refinance it because they are purposely hoping you don't have that $100,000 so that they can basically repossess, take possession of your property, and then potentially sell it to somebody else. Okay? Does that make sense? This is, once again, this is where those old westerns start to make a lot more sense. It's like, why are all these people losing the family farm? Well, in many instances, it wasn't because maybe the farm wasn't producing or the ranch wasn't producing. It was because there was sort of this whole mindset by a lot of the lenders of, we're going to take repossession of your property after a relatively short loan term. But see, here's the beautiful part about it from the lender's perspective is, over that 5 years, what was Paul doing? Paul was improving the property. He was building a house. He was, adding crops. He was, putting up fence lines and doing all this stuff. So whenever the lender gets it back after 5 years, all this work has been done and put into the property, and the value of the property is worth a heck of a lot more than probably what was originally lent. No wonder lenders still have reputations, in many cases, of being unscrupulous and potentially predatory and those sorts of things, because there are origins of where that kind of activity took place, time and time again. And there wasn't a lot of regulation to prohibit it. It was very clear. You signed a contract. 5 years. Okay? So the only way that you were going to have that money after 5 years is you would have had to do what? Literally put 20 grand into your mattress, so to speak, every year on top of the $10,000 that you were paying in interest in order to potentially have the $100,000 5 years later. Does that make sense? Well, how many people do you think did that? Not many. Okay? And still don't.
No, you still do. Hard money lenders is exactly how it goes.
No, and that's the point. There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Okay? Interest-only mortgages are really, they're great if you know what you're doing and you realize the consequence that you're potentially taking. But in the event of you're not able to save that extra bit of money, because the reality is most business owners, most private individuals are not able to set aside all of that extra money on their own to be able to pay down that balance, especially over a roughly short time horizon. Okay? Now, do these types of loans still exist? Absolutely they exist. Okay? And part of the reason why they exist is because you have lenders saying to you as a borrower, we can get you a lower monthly payment on the loan if you do an interest-only mortgage than if you do a traditional mortgage. Because the reality is, if you take this number, the $10,000 a year in interest, and you divide that by 12, look what number you're going to get. Does that number look familiar? 833.33. That's just the interest off of our original example, isn't it? Yeah. So the point being is, you're not paying any interest at all. You're only paying, you're not paying any principal at all. You're only paying interest. So your loan balance never, ever, ever goes down with an interest-only mortgage. Right. Okay. And as you just mentioned, one of the things that helped to exacerbate the problem of the meltdown in 2007, 2008, this was one of the culprits, along with adjustable rate mortgages, okay, which we're going to get to as well. But right now, let's just focus on the interest only. So, let's make sure that you're paying attention. So on an interest only mortgage of $100,000 with a 5-year term, how much is your balance at the end of 5 years? $100,000. Okay, just making sure you're paying attention, all right? So in other words, you have not paid off anything, okay? You still owe the original full balance. Okay, let's say that you had an interest-only mortgage for 30 years for $100,000. How much is your balance at the end of 20 years? $100,000. How much is it at the end of 30 years? $100,000. Okay, the point being is, regardless of the term of the loan, an interest-only mortgage, the balance never goes down. Okay? Is everybody clear with that?
Unless the contract is finished, right?
I'm sorry?
Unless you finish the agreement, the term, or whatever.
Well, yeah, but, but the point is, you've got to pay off that full balance.
The interest, though.
No.
The interest is continual. You're going to have interest payments all the way throughout,
Okay.
but you're not paying down anything on the balance of the loan.
You're not lowering the principal at all.
Correct. You're making interest-only payments, period. All right? Now, sort of following in the footsteps of the interest-only mortgage was something called the constant amortization mortgage. That's not what we currently have. That is not the constant payment mortgage. It's the constant amortization mortgage. Now, the reason for the introduction of the constant amortization mortgage is it was kind of a middle ground, stopgap solution to help fix the problem of the interest-only mortgages. And also, let me kind of go back a step with the interest-only mortgages. Part of the reason why you only had kind of interest-only mortgages was due to technology. Think about the technology that was available to you in pretty much the 1700s and the 1800s and you know, early 1900s. You're pretty much limited to what? A piece of paper and a pencil. And maybe at some point a slide rule, but pretty much a piece of paper and a pencil. Okay? So if that's the case, the mathematics to actually do the calculations for the mortgage, you pretty much had to be able to do just, you know, basically multiplying, adding, subtracting, dividing. It was basic math, is my point. Okay? Well, at some point, and you kind of begin to realize that with a little bit of additional math, we could do the constant amortization mortgage. Well, the way that it works is as follows. You actually do pay off the loan over a quicker period of time, but it is where you have, let's say, the $100,000 loan, and you have 360 months worth of payments. You simply divide that. This is not dealing with the interest at the moment. This is just dealing with the payment piece. So what we're going to say is that with the constant amortization mortgage, you're going to pay off a fixed